Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Ruby live event. My name is Chef Ken Rubin, and we have live office hours today. If you haven't ever joined our office hours, they're basically designed to provide a space to ask whatever questions you have about food and cooking and post them for answering live on the air today. So if you have any questions about your courses, cooking techniques, troubleshooting a recipe, anything about ingredients, this is a great forum for you to ask questions. It's really easy. All you need to do is type the question in the top right-hand part of the screen, right next to where you see me talking, and click that black add button. That puts it into a moderation queue so we have a quick look at it before we post it. When you do see questions posted on the right-hand side, if there's a question that you like, just go ahead and click on the heart. That will raise it in the order of preference so I get to it just a little bit faster. But otherwise, really looking forward to your questions, and we already see a lot of questions rolling in here. As a reminder, we do have students from all of our Ruby courses joining us, including our plant-based courses, our non-plant-based courses, and courses with some of our partners as well. So thank you for just understanding that and recognizing we have a lot of different types of learners joining us. First question from Nancy. Hi, I recently received a notice that all of my graded activities had to be completed by the official end of my course next month. Does this mean that extension time can only be used to complete non-graded activities like videos and practice recipes? So Nancy, if you have an extension on your course, that means that all of the activities that are graded, all those accessible activities, will also be available to you. Those are the only parts of the courses that really kind of lock out basically, after that time lapse. Otherwise, the content in terms of watching videos or being able to view a recipe, all that will be available to you whether you have the extension or not. It's really just those activities and those graded activities that are not allowed outside of that term. Betsy has a question here. Hi, my husband makes foil wrap packages of veggies for the grill. He usually adds a tablespoon of olive oil, and they're delicious. What could be used instead of the oil? Well, Betsy, there's all kinds of things I think you could use to build flavor, add flavor in that sort of a context. I think that, one of the things that people like about that style of cooking is you get, the ability to have high heat and direct heat and, some of those really great flavors that develop when you have, that much heat being developed with your vegetables. And you can achieve that without using oil. You can achieve that by just using flavorful herbs and spices and maybe some kind of a coating, like a reduction of some sort as a coating. So in my world, that might be some reduced stock, maybe some stock that has some aromatics added to it. Could also just be some vinegar, some highly flavorful liquid that a small amount can help herbs and spices adhere, and just building flavor. So starting with really great ingredients, adding those components that build flavor, and then also thinking about the role of adding flavor after they come out of that packet, right? So after they're done being cooked. So you can apply all that heat, and if you're at all worried about sensitive spices being burnt or overcooked or charred or anything like that, you can even add some of those things in after the cooking process while they're still very hot, and making that part of the finishing step. I would also say that you can do you can do some things that involve coating those vegetables in thicker, more flavorful type mixtures. So instead of just tossing it in something really light like some stock or some flavored vinegar, you can also really do something more substantial. So think about thinning out some tahini with some garlic or some lemon, or making a light dressing with some cashew, some ground cashews, and things like that, where you can actually have some more substance. The only concern there is that you want to be extra sensitive around your heat and your timing. Next question here is from Jimmy. I'm interested in discovering how to best savor foods using spices and herbs. It is a talent I sorely need. Thank you. Um, well, Jimmy, I would say, number one, it's something where you're going to find for yourself as you develop your palate and your ability to discern the differences between flavors and being able to identify, just because of your sensory input, what a certain herb or spice might be. You'll find that it just takes time. It just takes practice. It is, I think, one of those skills or one of those things that people pick up by just being overall more mindful about how they eat and small amounts of information, right? So sometimes I'll prepare something and I'll just focus on two or three ingredients. Just as an example, I'll make a sautéed vegetable dish, and it might be carrots, shallots, and then one spice, right? Let's take cumin seeds. And by focusing on just that one spice and articulating that spice, you can really almost take it as a time to study that flavor, to understand, okay, well, gosh, I really like the way that tastes. I could use more of that. Or, wow, that was strong for me. I want to pull back. I like the flavor, but I could pull back on it. Sometimes in doing that, you can really begin to identify, number one, the things you like and the things you don't like, but also that certain spices you might want in a more robust or a bold way. And other spices you want to pull back. Maybe you're sensitive to them, or maybe you like them, but you don't want it to overpower the flavor of the food itself or the ingredient itself. And everyone has different preferences there. So I think, for you, it's probably going to be a process. And I think that when you say, you want to discover how, that's probably a very apt term, because really it involves you seeking out those experiences where you're trying some of those new spices or those new herbs or those combinations. And then you're thinking through, well, gosh, I want to do that again, right? Like, I went there, I discovered those flavors, those spices, and that was something that was appealing. Let's go back and even make it better next time. And for me, that's part of the excitement around cooking, is I guess knowing that you always have that next chance to go back and replay, but maybe modify a little bit. And for me, so much of the joy and the satisfaction of cooking comes from that exploration, that discovery. Certainly within herbs and spices, that's an entire universe. I mean, you can look online and find books devoted just to individual herbs or spices, and certainly books that are more the encyclopedia of. But those are also good places to start to understand, the history of some of these things. Some cases, the health or wellness values that they might bring, and so on. So great question there. Next question. Hi, I recently asked about the value of parsley. Can you also talk about the value of paprika? Is it just for looks, or why else would you want to use it? Thanks in advance. So Claire, I think both of those ingredients, parsley and paprika, are of course very, very common. Most households have them or use them or are familiar with them. I think that they're both overlooked as ingredients, in part because they seem so typical. They're low cost, they're readily available. They're not particularly potent or powerful flavors, but I think they each add, or have the capacity to add, tremendous flavor. So I love using fresh herbs when I cook, when I finish dishes. I think that something like parsley adds just an incredible brightness or freshness to foods. There's entire dishes that I think depend on parsley as that primary flavor. Things like tabbouleh, or like a Argentinian chimichurri sauce, where the brightness, the green, herbal component is the basis of the dish. It forms the foundation of the dish. And those dishes are very different in terms of the ultimate flavor profile that they take and how they're, consumed and so on, but they both leverage parsley for really particular reasons. So I find that the more I cook and the more I experience world cuisines and foods from different places, the more I recognize the incredible importance of the use of fresh herbs in a lot of those foods. And it's not just a seasonal thing. You find the fresh application, the dried application, and so on. When it comes to paprika, I would think it's very, very similar. Again, people use it as a garnish. It's sometimes sprinkled on top of food just to make it kind of pop or stand out. But paprika as an ingredient, as a spice, is, tremendously important, tremendously flavorful ingredient. It's, made from ground peppers, right? So that has a lot of inherent flavor. They can range in terms of styles of paprika from very mild and sweet to more tangy, all the way to quite, quite spicy, quite piquant, right? Quite even bitter sometimes, depending on the variety of chili. So for me, when you talk about paprika, there's a huge range of flavors that you can get depending on the variety and the style and so on. Some of the other things I like to think about with paprika is, it definitely contributes a certain thing to a dish if it's cooked in for a period of time. It also contributes something if it's just used as a garnish. One of the things I always like to say around paprika is, layer those flavors. You can find ways to add paprika in and have it be, fully incorporated in the dish. You can also find ways to use it more topically to, let those flavors pop. But use it in a way that really layers that, and you'll, I think, begin to understand that the cooked paprika, the long, slow simmered paprika, is going to have a different flavor set than if you just kind of sprinkle it on top of something where it's going to be a lot more fresh and a lot more kind of lively on your palate. Next question here from Alyssa. A brief navigation overview of course sequence and structure. Will this certification be a credential to instruct others on plant-based cooking, healthy alternatives for oils and salts, plant-based lunch meat for sandwiches? I'm assuming, Alyssa, that you're in the plant-based certification program. So when people go through that course and they successfully complete that particular program, what people typically do is use that and leverage that in some form or fashion in a professional context. So if you have the goal of instructing others around cooking, I would say that, a credential like the Ruby Plant-Based Professional course is going to be helpful, but it's not a teaching credential. It's not a credential that teaches you how to teach people. It's really more a credential around understanding that style of cooking and understanding the competencies and the underpinnings of those approaches to cooking. I would say certainly if you want to go teach people, it's a great goal, but the course itself is not designed to be a train the trainer or to be, teaching you how to teach people. I think that it's probably one of the primary positive outcomes that we see from people in the course, though. People who successfully complete want to share. They want to do more than just cook for others. They want to get people to be on their own path or self-sufficient in their own kitchen. And home instruction or online instruction could be a part of that for sure. Next question here from Dot. Hi, I want to bake some chocolate chip cookies. Which chocolate chips can I use? Don't they all contain oil? And if they do, isn't it better to make your own chocolate with cacao powder and butter? So Dot, there are many chocolate chips out there that don't contain added oil. When you buy chocolate products, they can really range depending on how they kind of are intended to be used or how they're marketed. Anything from like lower cost chocolate chips, which will add things like oil just to stretch it out to make them more low cost, to higher end chocolates that are really just going to be, sugar and cacao and cocoa butter, naturally occurring fat from the processing, but not added refined oil. So if you're worried about that, I would say just use cacao, raw cacao, use cocoa. Those do contain fat as a product, but you don't need to then add additional oil to a recipe to have that chocolate flavor. But certainly, if you were to go online and maybe do a search for oil-free chocolate chips, or if there's healthier chocolate chips options out there, that might be one avenue. But also, just higher quality chocolate won't have any oil added like that. Next question here is from Susan. Susan says, "Hi, I'm struggling with the flipping technique during oil-free saute. Either my foods flip out of the pan or doesn't do the requisite somersault. Could you please discuss and demonstrate?" Thank you, Susan. I'm sitting in my home office. I'm not in a kitchen, so I can't demonstrate. The video for flipping, I think does a good job of demonstrating the particular hand motion that's required for doing the flipping. And the flipping doesn't require oil in the pan. I used to demonstrate the flipping technique by just using cubes of bread. So if you have cut up vegetables or other things like that, you can certainly practice doing the flipping technique with those things. The beans and rice, dried beans and rice, uncooked beans and rice example is another good way to practice. Typically, it's just a matter of not kind of using enough force on that downward motion before you give that little wrist pull back and give it that little swirl. So the whole thing is you're really leveraging that movement of the food as it hits that downward slope against that bottom of the pan. And then it pops up and you're basically just swooping under and catching it. Again, not a great way to demonstrate, but if you went back into the course and rewatched that video a few times and maybe just spent some time practicing when you're not actually under the gun around cooking, like if it's not like, oh, I got to get dinner on the table, that might be useful. But I like the technique of using a piece of bread or a few small pieces of bread chopped up just to get that kind of that wrist motion down. Next question here from Carol Ann. Thank you, Chef Ken. Should garlic, minced or crushed or whole, rest before being added to a recipe? If so, why? I don't see any reason to rest the garlic after you've cut it or chopped it or minced it. For me, I think people, sometimes will say that if you mince it up and then you let it sit, some of those things that make the garlic smell will dissipate in the air and your garlic won't be as powerful. For me, I'm eating the garlic because I want it to taste like garlic. I want those aromatics to be in my food and then in my mouth, not just floating around the air of the kitchen. All foods have, these volatile compounds, these elements of various sorts that give food the aromas that we all notice, that we all appreciate. And those compounds are finite, right? They only exist in a certain amount in any given food item. If those are going out into the open air before we're cooking them, then it means we don't get to enjoy them while we're actually eating them. So I like to try to just, be as fresh as possible in those contexts, capture all that flavor. If I'm worried about it being too strong, I'll either just use less garlic, use less of the product, or I'll find a cooking method that will mellow that out, that I can use to temper that raw, aggressive garlic flavor. I can find some way to dampen that just through heat, through cooking. Next question. I've been out of town for 3 weeks for a family emergency. I desperately need an extension. How to proceed? So, Kathy, if you're having an issue at all, anything whatsoever, please do reach out to our customer support student services team. They're amazing. They will absolutely help you if you just let them know what's going on. They'll help you with an extension. They'll make sure that you're set up. They'll make sure you know where to go and how to log in and help hopefully put you at ease a little bit. But yeah, first things first, don't worry about this. Worry about your family and take care of those things. And we'll be here when you need us. Next question here. Hello, Chef Ken. What is the best way to get the flavor of ham and turkey in plant-based food, referring to Thanksgiving? It's always such an interesting question or kind of conundrum around cooking plant-based foods, but still having this affinity or this desire to have these certain flavor sets or flavors that people either expect or have a craving for. When it comes to like these sorts of meaty flavors, we'll just take them as separate items because ham and turkey are very, very different in terms of what they're contributing. The ham obviously has a kind of a very, very salty and then a smokiness to it. So people who are looking for like that sort of flavor can sometimes make that up by adding, savory and smoked components to foods. So people who, are looking for kind of that larger flavor set might look towards smoked tempeh or smoked jackfruit. Even things like taking, and this is something I've only done once and it didn't turn out exactly as I planned, but taking something like a whole celery root or a whole rutabaga, roasting it and smoking it and then glazing it. And you can get, kind of what looks to be like a little mini roast that you can then slice. Mine was just overcooked, so the texture was off, but it did have that kind of smoky flavor. And there's lots of ways to add that flavor to foods, especially if you just want a small amount in a side dish or something like that. When it comes to something like turkey, that's like a center of the plate, main course sort of thing. It doesn't really have a whole lot of flavor in itself. Turkey tends to be very mild and dry and so on. It's really more about how you dress it up and how you build sauces and add other things that makes that much more interesting for people. So I would just say, find other things that become satisfying, that become savory, that become interesting for you. You don't have to depend on those kind of center of the plate animal proteins to make people happy, to make people feel satisfied about having those great flavors. So, give people something really substantial. Give them something with great flavor, with umami, with depth. Use the mushrooms. Use dried tomatoes. Use lots of herbs. Use all those things that we talk about all the time that can help build that flavor arc. Combination of sweet and savory and sour, adding components of bitterness. These are all things that make food taste round and interesting and make you want to take that next bite. So hopefully that helps. If not, certainly do reach out to us if there are particular recipes or certain sorts of things that you're trying to go for. But, I found more and more that our family, when it comes to holiday table, just becomes really just this amazing assortment of side dishes, beautiful vegetable side dishes and smaller things that we can kind of taste. Are there any more advanced courses for whole food plant-based cooks to take after the completion of the professional certification? What additional skills does one need? Interesting question, Marina. I would say the additional skills really depends on your personal professional goals. The plant-based professional program is really designed to be intensive immersion, kind of a survey course in plant-based. And we've had people, take that course and then move on and get more advanced coursework under their belt, whether it's culinary type coursework or coursework in the health space. We have had a lot of students do kind of supplemental learning in tandem with their Ruby course. The eCornell, uh, the certificate for plant-based nutrition through eCornell comes to mind in particular as a course that we've had a lot of students show a lot of interest in. It's not a cooking course; it's really more about nutrition and the underpinnings of plant-based nutrition. But when it comes to cooking programs, the plant-based professional course that we have is the most extensive program that we offer. I would say for further learning, it's really a matter of having those hands-on experiences, in-person experiences, work experiences, and things that can help develop and bolster those skills. Okay, Monica has another question here. She's asking for our final dessert showcase in the Essential Vegan Desserts class. Do all of our desserts need to be displayed on white plates like our previous assignments, or can we use fancier plates? Oh gosh, Monica, I'm going to have to defer to Chef Fran Costigan. She's as you know, the amazing leader of that course. I'm going to leave it to her to make that decision. I know that generally when we ask for plated assignments that we want it to be on some sort of a very plain or white plate that registers the colors of the food really well. We're not grading for the platter that you're using. We want it to be really about the food. But in the case of the dessert showcase, the nature of that is to be very presentation minded and showing off the product. And we also understand that some of the format of those products might be larger or smaller, or maybe not as conducive to being on a plain white plate for presentation. So, Monica, my recommendation would be if you want to reach out to Fran directly, that would be great. If you want to reach out to our support team and just let them know that you have this question, maybe that can give them your direct contact for Fran also. But probably just find the way to get in touch so we can make sure that Fran can help you directly with that. I hate to speak for her. I'd love for her to weigh in on that decision there. Oh, we'll have it taken care of. Our producer Patrick just forwarded it to her, so she has your question, Monica. Thank you, Patrick. Next question coming in from Trish. Besides roasting for crispy roast duck, what else do you recommend for cooking duck legs or breasts for variety? So, classically, duck legs were cooked in a method called confit, which is cooking in the fat of the duck. And that will produce a product that will be very, very classic. Duck breasts are oftentimes cooked using dry heat methods. So roasting or pan searing and those sorts of techniques are oftentimes used for those types of game birds. I would say that, again, with on any of these, animal proteins, so much of the application of technique is going to be the key driver for success. So when it comes to something like duck, it's really about understanding the fattiness inherent in that, in those cuts, and working with it so that your dish becomes, enjoyable and not overwhelmed with those qualities. Next question from Susan. Who's your favorite cooking chef to watch on the net? Oh gosh. I don't know that I have a favorite. I of course watch lots of different people for lots of different reasons who cook online. I don't really have a favorite. For me, I'm always fascinated by different types of production, by different ways that different food personalities have of communicating. More and more, I think that food media and food instruction online is about helping people very specifically, and finding ways to directly connect with people through stories and through things that resonate because you're solving a problem. You're helping someone do something specific. You're helping someone achieve a goal or do something particular that they can then internalize and move forward with. So, a lot of the food shows or chef shows are still very much driven around ego and competition and things, and those aren't as interesting to me. It's really, for me, more about the chefs who are using their platform to find perspective and sharing and creating platforms for others to do the same thing. Next question here from Billy. Hello, Ken. I'm struggling trying to complete all the activities in the course. I'm a business owner with a overwhelmingly busy schedule. I don't always have certain ingredients on hand. Can I substitute some ingredients for the activity task without penalty? Yeah, absolutely, Billy. I would say that in 90% or 95% of all the activities, there are pretty easy substitutions that you can make. In particular, when we're talking about activities that are competency or technique based, we might even present to you a number of different recipes to articulate or demonstrate that competency. And within each one of those recipes, absolutely feel free to make a modification or an alteration. Ask yourself the question, will this modification change my technique? Will it change the essential competency, the key method, the key thing I'm learning in this task? And if the answer is no, then don't worry about it. If you're just changing a little bit of the flavor profile or changing the way you're finishing something, that's great. That's just you applying what you've learned in a new and novel way, and being a good student. I would say so much of what we're trying to teach at Ruby is to not be hung up so much on the recipe and to look at the technique more broadly. So if you're trying to make a substitution, again, it doesn't change the technique. If you're doing poaching or you're doing roasting and the substituting chives for parsley or cumin for coriander or apple cider vinegar for champagne vinegar or whatever it is, like none of that changes the technique. If you do have a particular question though, Billy, and you want to run it by us and have someone on our support team or someone on our chef faculty team have a look, we're certainly happy to. But I just know from experience working with many, many hundreds of students that, 95 times out of 100, the substitutions work out perfectly fine. Cindy has a question here. Hello, Ken. Your enthusiasm for dried mushrooms gave me the courage to make mushroom stock with dried shiitakes, fresh button, and portobello. Thank you so much. Would love ideas for using the shiitakes I removed from the stock. Gosh, so Cindy, it's always an interesting question. Those shiitakes that come out of the stock have, a pretty good amount of flavor still. A lot of the vegetables that we typically see coming out of stocks don't have a lot of flavor. I would say something like a dried shiitake still has a fair amount of flavor coming out of that stock. You could just go ahead and chop that up into pieces and add it to a stir fry or add it to a filling. You could puree it even and make a kind of a sauce with it. I would say another thing you could do is, just find another way to add it to a dish and, leverage some of the texture of that mushroom. So if you've had a shiitake mushroom simmering and maybe doesn't have the full power or the full flavor it used to have because that stock took on that flavor, you might just say, well, it's got great texture still. How do we leverage that? There's a great dish that I've been cooking for a very long time that is essentially just dehydrated shiitake mushrooms that are rehydrated and cooked with a few big pieces of ginger and garlic and some Chinese cooking wine. Sometimes just a small amount of honey or sugar just to add a little bit of sweetness. And essentially that's something that you can slow cook or braise, after it's been soaked, and let that, simmer and let that reduce. And those flavors of the ginger and the garlic and the mushroom can really, really kind of come together and be nice. I suspect with those mushrooms, you can still have some nice flavor in that sort of a context. Otherwise, just yeah, like I said, chop them up and put them into something. And if they don't provide great flavor, that's fine. You still have a lot of other things to provide that flavor. Tom says, "Hi, I just started the professional Rubin Professional Chef program. Any tips on how to approach the program?" Well, first off, Tom, welcome. We're so glad you can join us. The biggest piece of advice I have for new students typically is in the realm of staying involved, staying engaged, finding that cadence or that pattern that you can adhere to that helps you come back, multiple times a week. We have some Ruby students who are with us every day learning, some that are with us a few times a week, some a few times a month. I would say that there's definitely very strong correlations between frequency in terms of how many times you engage and what your overall level of success is. We did design our courses to be modular. In other words, work when you can, show that momentum and that intensity when you can. And if you need to back off for a few days or a week or do something else, then that's fine too. Another, piece of advice, Tom, is, when you need help, reach out to us, ask for help. We have, as I've said before, amazing people here at Ruby who are so committed to your success, making sure that you have whatever it is you need to be successful. A little bit of motivation, some direction, a reminder on how to log in, help navigating a page, whatever it is. Like, this is what we do. We're here for you so that when you make the decision to join us, that we can follow through, and as you need support, we can provide it. And if you have questions about how to proceed, we can give you some guidance. One other thing, Tom, is I'll just mention is pacing and sequence and timing. Understand that some of the tasks that you see really might only take 2 or 3 minutes, and other tasks might take a half an hour or an hour. It feels good to finish tasks. So during those times when you do have the ability to spend 20 minutes or a half an hour, go ahead and watch those videos, watch those sequence videos where you can learn start to finish a thing. And then, maybe the next day you can actually practice doing the cooking. But it feels really good to complete those tasks and move ahead and feel that sense of progress. Next question here from Joy. Hello, I just enrolled in the cooking course. What is the best way to store fresh spices like ginger root and turmeric root? Thank you. So fresh roots like ginger or turmeric should be stored in a cool, dry place. So that could be in a refrigerator. Oftentimes with those sorts of things, I'll have them in a container by themselves, so I can just grab that container, or they might be wrapped in, some clean towel or like a terry cloth. That's something I often do when I store things in my fridge, and I just want to have a way to kind of segregate them or keep them in their own little space. I find that both fresh turmeric and fresh ginger have a fairly stable, long shelf life if they're maintained well and they're not moist or they're not too dry. They're perfectly fine being kept cold. I think the big risk for them is just kind of drying out or being forgotten in the bottom of a bin someplace. So hopefully that helps. Monica says, will there be more Forks Over Knives or Essential Vegan Desserts classes once we are done with these courses to further our culinary skills? We have the courses that we currently have in our catalog. We have 2 different Forks Over Knives courses. We have the Essential and the Ultimate, the Essential being the shorter of the 2. We also have an Essential Vegan Desserts, which is the only plant-based pastry program that we offer. And then we have the Plant-Based Professional Certification Program, which is a longer program. It's about 6 months. That includes, some topics that are covered in both the Forks Over Knives and the Essential Vegan Desserts, but has a whole other scope. So it could be, Monica, that you might want to look into that professional plant-based certification program that we have. That might be something you're interested in. Otherwise, we just have those 2 Forks Over Knives programs and the Vegan Desserts program on the Ruby platform. Next question here. One of the recipes asks for wild mushrooms. Can I use regular mushrooms like white or portobello that are easier to find, less cost? Will it affect my score on the assignment? No, that's absolutely fine. Use whatever mushrooms you can. Again, the technique in the dish just requires mushrooms, so you understand kind of the cooking process for those mushrooms. Otherwise, I would say, use the mushrooms that you have. White button mushrooms, cremini mushrooms, oyster mushrooms, portobello mushrooms, whatever you have available to you would be perfectly fine. Next question here. What's the best way to roast large amounts of carrots for a carrot puree soup? Chopping, cooking time, storing. So, I guess it depends on what you mean by large amount. Typically, if I was to make a large amount of roasted carrot soup or something roasted root vegetable soup at home, I would get all my sheet pans. I'd have my 4 oven racks and my 4 sheet pans out, and I would kind of identify how many carrots I could put on each one of the sheet pans. And realistically, I could probably put a few pounds of carrots on those 4 sheet pans. I don't want to crowd them too much. And I would make sure I had a really, really hot oven. If I'm going to look for roasting and looking for color and caramelization, I would do kind of a rough cut. Again, knowing I'm going to puree it. I'm not looking for knife skills, but you want to have them go through caramelization and have coloration from roasting. You also want them to cook at approximately the same rate. So, not super critical, but they should be rough cut to be approximate. I just roast them in a really hot oven, a 425-degree oven. If you have convection, great. Until they're, nice and golden brown, and you have speckles and you have those brown, dried, crispy edges, or whatever it is you're looking for specifically in terms of that aesthetic for your roasted carrot. How roasted do you want them? But, ultimately, you can probably do it fairly quickly. You can do the rough cut on your veggies, put them on however many sheet pans you have. Again, not too crowded, super hot oven. And then, making the puree is just as simple as, letting them cool just long enough so you can handle them. But otherwise, you can puree them cold and then heat up the soup, right? You can do it either way. But yeah, super simple once you have those done. Hello, chef. I'm into a 5 weeks. I'm 5 weeks into a whole food plant-based lifestyle. I made a mushroom stroganoff last night that was really bland. What ingredients would you use in this dish to create umami, if that's the right term? So, Rodney, if you're making food, mushroom stroganoff or something like that in particular, that should have a lot of flavor and it's bland, chances are better than not that you might need to add just a small amount of sodium, a little bit of salt. People who are cooking completely from scratch with no packaged goods and no additives, unless it's counterindicated by a health professional, could oftentimes benefit from a small amount of salt just to bring out some of the flavors in those foods. You don't need to use a lot, but even small amounts can help, bring out the natural flavors in those foods. Things like mushrooms, you could be building a lot of flavor with your technique in a mushroom dish, making sure you have enough aromatics and other things that are building flavor there for yourself. So I would really go big on making sure you have a variety of good mushrooms, wild mushrooms, shallots, garlic, onions. You've got fresh herbs, you've got black pepper, you've got things that are really building your dish. remember, if you're not adding those flavors in, you're not going to experience them. Their flavors aren't going to make themselves. So when you are cooking this way, oftentimes you have to say, well, I'm not adding a bunch of butter. I'm not adding a bunch of fat or bacon or whatever else that I used to rely on to build flavor. So where does that flavor come from? And you have to oftentimes magnify those flavors just so it comes through. Next question. I heard it was not recommended to cook with honey. It seems that raising the temperature makes it toxic. What is your understanding of heating honey? I haven't ever heard much about heating honey making it toxic. There's a lot of people who I think would prefer raw honey, honey that is, basically never heated or treated at all with heat, even during processing, for some of the benefits that raw honey might offer. But I've never heard of anything around heated honey becoming toxic. It's really more about the diminishment of the potential benefits you might get with a raw honey product. Next question here from Dorothy. When I steam vegetables, is it worth it to stave the steaming liquid in my cooking stock jar, or does the high heat destroy the vitamins? The steaming liquid just won't have a lot of flavor. If you're looking for a liquid that's going to taste like the vegetables, well, then you should just use submersion cooking and cook those vegetables in that liquid. Otherwise, the steam really has the primary function of cooking those vegetables, not the function of bringing that flavor into that solution. It's really not designed to do that. So I would say it'll be minimal, probably not worth your time in terms of saving that liquid. You're way better off just making a flavorful stock if that's what you're trying to do. Next question here. I have a safe food handler certification. Is there one that specifically covers safe beverage handling for bar environment, service for wines, on-tap liquor, for cleaning, sanitizing standards, legal requirements, etc.? There are specific industry certifications for bar and beverage. They definitely do break it up according to more the legal compliance type things versus the food safety things. Most of the food safety concerns for people comes because of handling foods that might be ready to eat and things like this. Typically in bar and beverage, you don't have the same level of risk in those areas, although typically bar and beverage operators still require the food handler card because they might also be serving food or otherwise handling food that the guest ultimately eats. Next question here. Do you have any recommendations for a good quality knife set that doesn't rust? Well, most knives made these days are going to be primarily knives made from stainless steel. There's various kinds of stainless steel, but they are primarily very, very rust resistant. I don't want to say rust proof because, they're typically not rust proof, but given the stainless steel quality, they're not really prone to rusting the same way an old fashioned carbon steel blade might be. These days you almost have to seek out one of those more old fashioned carbon style blades. But otherwise, I think that there are, at this point, dozens or, at least a dozen really good brands of affordable, widely available knives out there that you can buy from any retailer. It can be from Williams-Sonoma, Sur La Table, a Target, any retailer that is selling cookware, kitchenware should have a reasonable kind of entry-level knife set. I'll say that, a lot of people don't need a whole set. They really just need 2 or maybe 3 good knives. They need a good chef knife, 7, 8, 9-inch chef knife. It could be conventional style chef knife, kind of a European or German style knife. It could be a more Asian style or a Japanese style knife. It just depends on your cooking style. So, some larger workhorse knife, um, oftentimes a small utility knife or a paring knife, that can be something fairly small, anywhere from maybe 2 or 3 inches all the way up to 4 or 5 inches. And then for many people, having a serrated knife for cutting breads, for cutting soft foods, sometimes for things like tomatoes. A serrated knife might be called for, but really, if I look at my own cutting and my own kitchen habits, I go for my chef knife 95% of the time. It's most of my meals I make with that one knife, right? So you don't need to think too much about buying a whole set if really the first focus should be those initial knives. Next question here. What is your opinion about amino acids? Can adding them muddy flavors? Yeah, I've had them work both ways. They do add definitely a complexity of flavor that can be a distraction to other key flavors. They are very base, kind of earthy, deep flavors that you're getting when you buy those aminos. They're not bright, uplifting flavors. They also tend to be very salty. So I also give some caution, um, on those sorts of things. I would say just really a matter of how you're using them and to what extent you're using them. I find that, like using other, strongly flavored foods, a little can go a long way oftentimes to add the desired effect. Easy to go overboard. Linda asks, many plant-based recipes call for shallots, which I don't often have on hand. Can yellow onions substitute well? Yeah, yellow onions would substitute well. Some people find that a combination of onion and garlic creates a little bit more of a real shallot flavor, but onion, garlic, red onion, combination of those things will certainly get you in that right direction. Next question here from Karen. I have a family that is more often flexitarian than vegan. They are not fans of the high dependence on soy products or jackfruit or meat-like proteins. Do you have any suggestions on meals, menus, or products that can appeal to such a palate? Thanks. I would say that that's fairly common. A lot of people are flexitarian but don't want faux or false meat type products. I'll say for many people, those become great transition products or bridge products, but certainly not necessary by any means. For most people who don't want those things, it goes back to the basics, right? They go back to eating grains and beans and greens and just a lot of vegetables that you're becoming more dependent on the texture and the form of those vegetables versus anything that becomes managed by the soy or by the gluten or by the whatever it is that you're using to create some of those other textures. So for me, it just comes back to very basic foods. I eat a ton of foods that kind of fall into that category. So a lot of lentils, a lot of bean dishes. Bean dishes can be made lots of different ways. So it's tacos, it's burritos, it's soups, it's stews, it's different kinds of bean spreads, different things that you can add into different dishes. Whole grains become, hot dishes, cold dishes, salads. They're stirred in, they're added on, they're all kinds of different things. But, oftentimes for me, when I think about those back to basics types approaches, not being dependent on all of those products, it just means having a huge assortment of things. It just goes back to saying, well, great, our meal is going to be a variety of different vegetable dishes. Let's make this really exciting and not have just 2 or 3 dishes, which is fine. But let's have 6 dishes or 7 dishes, or make a dish that we know can be reheated really well for next time, or that we can take some of those that we batch cook and turn something else, turn it into something else. So that's always what I think about is, hey, there's that's the way people ate for most of time, right? They didn't have those alternatives. So It's going back to a lot of those sorts of things. Vanessa asked, how long is it good to brine a turkey and why? I heard a couple of days was good. So when you're brining animal protein, I would say that the larger the cut, the more time you need. If you're working with a very large turkey, it could be a day or two for sure. Couple of days might be too long. It depends on the style of the brine that you're using and how saline it is and its percentages and things like that. But I would say overall, like a day or two is probably fine, or depending on overnight is probably fine. James D said, hello, chef, just finished the 90-day Forks Over Knives course. Is it possible to get an invite code for the big switch? Absolutely, James. We'd love to have you. So if you go ahead and I guess maybe shoot us an email to our support team and let them know that you were on a live event and you'd like it. That would be one option. That would be great. If not, you can go into Switch and just make that request, and I'm sure the community very, very quickly will get you in. I'm seeing very, very short wait times on that community. So, yeah, we'd love to get your perspective also, James, on Switch once you're in it, having known that you've taken this larger course. So that would be really, really good to know. Well, looks like all the questions we had for today. Really amazing group. If I didn't get to your question or wasn't able to answer it fully, please do reach out to us. Email us at support@ruby.com and let us know how we can help. If there's anything that you need from us during a time in the pandemic when you might not be able to get certain ingredients or you might need some extra time, also do please let us know. We understand that people are out there struggling and just trying to make the time and make the space to make the cooking happen. So thank you for doing that. So until next time, we look forward to seeing you in class, and happy cooking. Take care.